Well, here we are for another conversation. I've been looking forward to this one as we get you to talk about memoir and biography. We've been on the journey from historical fiction to what do we call it? Creative nonfiction.
Yeah.
And otherwise in your last few books or your first few books and now on to your books Maggie and My Story, My Song. So looking forward to talking about memoir today.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I in this journey, I came to understand the difference between memoir and biography or autobiography. And what, so perhaps we'll start with that because what I have found out and the way I use it, the terms, is that a memoir, like biography, when you're writing biography, you're telling all the truth. I mean, everything you tell is true. You're not making anything up and so on. But memoir gives the author more flexibility because then you can put things in there. And of course, we talked about the Calhoun book. Um, that doesn't want to come into my head here at the moment. Oh, the man behind the marathons. And I called it creative um,
Nonfiction.
nonfiction because um, I wanted to put in some conversations between Ron and Fran. And I knew them so well. Like ordinarily, you wouldn't do that, but I knew them so well that I thought, okay, I can make this up because I know what they sounded like, and I know the kind of language they use, and I knew they had. I mean, we've been out with them so
Yeah.
many times, and so that's why I call that creative nonfiction. And it's a little bit between the same sort of thing with memoir and biography. Biography has to be, as I said, it has to be totally true, and you don't put any guesswork in there of what was said. But memoir is freer. You can put things in memoir, like if you're writing about somebody else, and you can kind of build some scenes if you like, and
Hmm.
you can do that thing with it. So I think that's important for writers to understand. You got to decide what exactly is the path you're going to take with this book.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we all have our own memories and they may or may not be the true accurate account of what actually happened if you ask someone else that was in that story or that scene. So yeah, you only have your own memories to go on, don't you?
Yeah, and so I think it kind of saves you by calling something a memoir because then you basically said, this isn't going to be 100% the actual things that happen. It's going to be mostly that, but it's going to have the odd thing in there that you've just interpreted it in a certain way.
Yeah. I should have gotten water today. How did you go from the other books to these two, and they're different from each other, and so I don't know how you want to tackle one versus the other, but how did you kind of make your foray into memoir and autobiography?
Um, okay, I wrote biography on, but we actually want to talk about
I know
auto.
I know we're mixing it up. It really is memoir though, because you didn't write either of Maggie or My Story, My Song as an autobiography, did you? Like they're both memoir, but the one isn't about you.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But this one, I would say my story, my song is as close to autobiography as
Okay.
as I've got because
Yeah.
even the title, you know.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, well, let's start with that one. So, because actually you wrote it, I think, after the other one, but maybe it's the easier one to start with. So, what made you decide to write that as a book? Because you had written some of your past stories before as kind of a compilation, maybe not necessarily a
Yeah.
book. but what made you really want to write a book about your past and your memories?
Well, I think that's kind of interesting to be saying this to you, but I think as you get older, you kind of, at least I want to leave something behind so that my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be able to know things about who I was. I always feel so sad that there are questions I would love to be able to get the answers to from my parents. And
Yeah.
I can't because I think those parents from after the Second World War and they were having their families and they'd gone through hell, they'd gone through terrible times. And I think they were just so excited to get on with the world and they didn't want to relive that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And your mother, we've talked about her before a little bit, had 13 children and other things she was doing. She didn't write stuff down, although she wrote something down, but we'll get there. But
Yeah.
but they didn't really have time almost to write stuff down about their life even either, right? So you did have time eventually to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably most people's experience that, my parents had 13 children over 25 years. So that's a lot of your married life, isn't it? That you're raising all these children and so on. So maybe it was different then. And of course my parents were both very, very busy in the community. My dad was ended up being the warden of the county. He was on all kinds of different boards and so on. And my mom, um, she was pretty. I always say I called her Valerie Volunteer because
Hmm.
she was typical of the women of the day. Not many of them had the opportunity to have jobs. My mom got her first job when she was 62, I think.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy, isn't it? But so they were busy leading different lives and so on than a lot of people do today. And now I forget where I was going with that.
Well, let's take it back to you because at some point you decided, no, I'm going to write my own stories down and you had the time to do so and there was a draw in that for you for, you were saying for the
Yeah.
for the rest of us to know who
Yeah.
you were, yeah, and are.
Well, that's right. And that was the draw. And I think as we get older, we start to sort out what our parents were doing as they were raising us, and we start to have a more balanced view of it, and we don't just think, oh my gosh, my mom was crazy, or I mean, we get over that and we understand what they were doing. I don't know if
Yeah.
have you had that feeling yet about me?
Oh, just the mom crazy part, yeah, for sure. No.
But anyways, so I wanted to tell my story about how fortunate I feel to
Yeah.
have grown up where and when I did. And maybe now is a good time to bring a personal story in there. When I was in high school, I went into the city for high school, and I was from the farm. And let me say, first of all, that growing up on the farm was so full of opportunities and so on for us. And we had these parents that, they wanted us to have everything we could in the sense of experiences, not in the sense of presents and that kind of stuff. But when I got older and I thought about that, and I thought I was so lucky to grow up in that time period where they were having the time of their lives, having
Mm,
a life instead of being in the Depression or in the Second World War. And so then I thought, no, I want to tell what it felt like for me and all the good things I had. Um,
mhm.
I grew up on a farm, but I didn't really care to go to the barn too much. But I joined 4-H, calf club, and
Mhm.
I went to the barn once a month to take my calf out and give it a walk and and
I saw Aunt Donna posting about that the other day, right? You weren't the only one of your siblings that worked with calves.
well, that was kind of another whole story that post the
Yeah.
other day.
Uh,
But anyways, I felt so lucky because what I got to do in that 4-H thing, and I joined the 4-H calf club because I was 13 and there was a particular boy I thought was pretty nice, and I knew,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So you mentioned 4-H before, but we didn't get this part of the story. Why you joined it.
Yeah, and so I thought, oh, and I went. I remember this. This is a scene. Went into mom and dad's bedroom, was just off the kitchen, and dad had gone in the bedroom. It was the middle of the day or whatever, and I followed him in there, and I said, Dad, I said, can I go to calf club tonight? And he looked at me and he said, well, sure, you can go to calf club. And he was so pleased because I was interested in calves and farming and stuff. No, Dad. I was interested in this one boy who was in grade 8 with me, and I thought he was pretty nice. Nothing ever came of that, by the way. No, but that's what got me to go there. And then,
Yeah.
what I realized is that we learned um, we learned how to show cattle, and you go to the fair and you'd show them in the ring, and you knew all this stuff. So that was good stuff to learn and learn to get closer to animals in that way. One of the best things that I learned was giving reasons for judging. So they'd have 4 cows, maybe, or 4 calves, or 4 whatever. And then you would go around and you'd look at them, and you knew a lot of the things, like you had to have a straight top line of the animal. And if it was a fully mature cow, then the milk sack had to be a certain way, and you got comfortable with saying words like teats and
As a teenager. Yeah.
and the best thing about that was that I had to go and sit and give the person who was taking reasons. I had to give that man, who would be an adult, somebody that I didn't know, and I had to give him my reasons for placing the 4 animals in the order that I did. And I
Hmm.
realized how good that was for me because I was a kid. I didn't know this man, and I had to go and I had to think about what I was doing, and I had to have some logical things. I had to know something about the animals and so on. But
Hmm.
just to have a 13 or 14-year-old who was had to be cognizant of what to say and what not to say, like it was a life
Yeah.
skill.
Yeah. And you don't realize that at the time. Like if we think back about, take it back to writing, the process, I think, of writing memoir, looking back on things like that, it allows you to see something extraordinary, maybe in this ordinary moment that you normally would have forgotten or didn't seem important, but you can kind of have that lens looking back, going, no, it helped make me who I am today. And those neat things. Like, yeah, like, so what do you think writing your stories and pulling those things out of yourself did for you as a writer, I guess, or as a person?
Well, I had to make a lot of decisions in writing that book because, of course, no kid is without making mistakes, and I did some bad things when I was a kid, and my brothers did some bad things, and so on. But I made a writing decision that I was not going to tell bad stories about somebody else. They're not my stories to tell. And I
Yeah.
and I'm never going to write a book where I condemn somebody, by telling their truth. It's not fair. Lots of people do it because they're trying to make money and sell the books and stuff. But I think when you're doing this kind of thing, you've got to decide who you are. And I always, sounds kind of hokey, but I always think of myself as a really honest person.
Hmm.
and an affair person. And I get very angry when somebody's unfair to me. I can't stand that. So, telling these stories, there's one story that I do tell in there about one of my brothers and myself, and we did this bad thing. And I didn't name my brother. See, I could get away with that because I had nine brothers.
It's not like you just had one like I do. If I named something, we'd all know it was Kevin.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
when you're doing that kind of a thing, when you're writing memoir and so on, you've got to decide who you are
Yeah.
and what's the most important thing to you. Is the most important thing to sell a book that is it's going to tell tales on people, or is it to tell on yourself if you want, but not on other people? It's not fair. We were kids,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. There's kind of a row to hoe or line to cross or not to cross. Like you'd have to get the other people involved in saying, should I tell our story?
Yeah.
If you were I don't know if you know the book, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. Did you ever read that book?
No, I think I have.
Anyway, it's a memoir I read last year, and it's a story of her and her siblings growing up with parents who were very neglectful. And so it's a different kind of thing, isn't it, to just say we were all in this. There were three kids, and it felt like they all kind of agreed, and even the parent who was still alive agreed that the story should be told, and it's a
Yeah.
fantastic book. But in your case, like you were really drawing a different line about what you would and would not talk about, I think. Yeah, to
Yeah.
protect other people. Yeah, and to keep that positive focus. You talked about that with the Ron Calhoun story too, like just to keep the positive focus of most of all. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be when you put your name out on a piece of work in the world. And you got to decide, what's important to me. And luckily, I was 60 when I started writing these books. And so I was old enough to have come to terms with who I am and the things that are important to me. I don't know what you do if you're 15, because I think
Hmm.
you haven't lived long enough to know what's important to you in that sense, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. Not that we don't want 15-year-olds to be writers, but there's something about the longevity of a book going out into the world that all writers have to think about, don't they? Like
Yeah,
it's not just a short thing. It's going to be there for as long as you can get that book from somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyways, those are some of the sort of moral, that sounds really kind of churchy, doesn't it? Those are some of the moral things that I think writers have to wrestle with.
Yeah. Is there anything else like that's sort of the decision to write it or not, or how to approach it? Was there anything else as you were writing that you thought about in terms of just that scope? It's kind of a scope thing or approach,
Hmm.
about how you were going to write My Story, My Song, particularly.
Well, I decided I would write it in first person, and that's the first book that I wrote in first person. And I'm very comfortable writing in a third person, and all my loyalist books talk about he and she and so on. And lots of writers write everything in first person if it suits them, but I like to have that difference of that I can take a step back
Mm.
from the story if I'm writing in third person. And it just gives you a little bit of freedom in that respect.
Oh, you mean so you wrote it in first? Did you say you wrote it in first person though? Yeah,
Yeah, this one I did, but
this one. Yeah, but the
my
other ones.
my loyalist books and my mother, we're going to talk about Maggie, but when my mother was writing that, I realized that she chose to write in no, I just got her. Yeah, she wrote in third person, and
Yeah,
it was her mother's story, so it was a family story as well, but she wrote it as um as though it wasn't her story.
yeah, yeah. Because she wasn't alive when that story took place, even so, she must have made a conscious decision about doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, she did. She was alive. She was when my grandparents split up. My mother was 8 years old, so she did have some memories of it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. I forgot. It's been a while since I read Maggie. I should have reread these two before we had this conversation. Sorry, sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Did you keep your reader in mind as you were writing My Story, My Song? Like you kind of wrote it for, those of us in your family and other folks too. But did you think about us as you were writing? Were we top of mind as you were crafting those stories?
Gee, I think only in the sense that I wanted to leave the stories for my family. That was the main thing. And then, of course, once you write a book, you kind of think, well, I might as well put it out with the world. But I mean, yeah, I don't know how you can write without keeping your reader in mind.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Did you have stories come to you as you were writing that book, or did you kind of outline it all ahead of time and you knew exactly what you were going to do? Like, was it a surprise in any way? Like, did new stories come to mind?
You know what? I'm not that kind of writer. I know Terry Fallis is a good friend, and he says that he has his stories all crafted out. He has pages of notes and all this stuff, and he knows exactly what's going to happen and all of this. I am not that person. I was never that person. When I was a kid in school writing essays, I would, you had to do research essays, and I would find my quotes that I wanted to use in that essay. And back in those days, that meant going to the library and getting real books out, and none
Yeah,
of this computer stuff. But all of us have a brain that works its own way.
yeah,
So as a writer, I had to realize that I'm really pretty good at keeping it all in my head. And what I do to mitigate that is at the end of like if I'm working on chapter one and I'm not quite finished and my 3 pages are written for that day, then I will write the ideas that are coming into my head and I'll put them at the
mm,
bottom of that. And then, so I never am wondering what to write about. You talk about writers and I can't think of the phrase right now, where they can't,
writer's block.
yeah, writer's block.
Yeah,
And,
couldn't
and
think of the
I,
phrase.
I just never, obviously, except for right then,
Irony.
I don't have writer's block because my brain seems to be able to hold most of it there. And then my thing of writing my notes and so on down at the end of the page allows me to start the next day. So again, that's not for
Yeah.
everybody, but it was for me.
Yeah, and maybe people have different ways of doing that. Like I will, because I usually have a phone nearby now, right? And I've got the notes app in there. If I have a flash of something that comes, who knows where we might be, right? Like I'll put it in my notes app and then later I'll kind of go and integrate it into my Scrivener file and figure out. But it's just like a random thought, hey? Like we just kind of
Yeah.
capture those thoughts when they come. I love that you did it kind of at the end of the session to make sure you didn't lose it. Yeah. How do
And
you do you use
I
your
do
phone?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I turned it off today for this, so I can't turn it on. But that notes section is the most jumbled up mess. And I do take things out and everything, but I'll just write down 5 or 6 words, and then it's enough to cue me what I was thinking. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, everybody has their tricks, and it depends. It also depends how old you are, because as we get older, we're not quite as good at remembering things and so on. And so it's really good to have a system so that
Yeah.
you can remember it.
Yeah, and the technology wouldn't work for everyone. Someone else might just have a physical book that they carry around that fits in their purse or something, hey,
Yeah.
and just jot it down. It doesn't really matter, but capturing and not losing those ideas. Did you ever wake up in the middle of the night and write ideas down? People say that that works
Never.
too. No, I've never done that.
See, that's what I mean. All of us are different. And
Yeah.
when I first started going down this a road to becoming an author and feeling comfortable calling myself an author and so on. When I first started to go down to that, people would make the mistake, in my opinion, of saying, here's what you have to do. Blah,
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. Do this, do this, do this, do this. No. What you have to do is figure out how your brain works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you know what you need.
Yeah. How to help yourself out with those strategies or whatever. Yeah. Now you
Yeah.
just made an interesting comment about how maybe it took you a while to call yourself an author. I'm not sure. Now I'm getting so that I can't remember what we've talked about either, since this is our sixth meeting. But do you think with memoir, particularly, that might be a struggle for people if they start to write memoir as their first book? Do you think it might be even more of a struggle to say, "Oh, I'm an author"? Because it occurs to me people might think, "Oh, it's just my stories, right? I'm just writing down my stories. Like I'm not an author. I'm just writing down
Yeah,
my stories."
people
Do you
do
think
say
it's
that.
you think it's harder to start with memoir maybe as an author in that respect?
Well, I think the first question that would come to mind, if you're going to say you're going to start with memoir, you're going to think to yourself, okay, so am I going to say I, or
Hmm.
he, she, and that's part and parcel of memoir. Either one can be used, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I again, I think you have to just start writing and see what feels comfortable. And of course, you're going to start this book several times, aren't you? You know,
Are you? Do you think most people do? Like they over time it happens that they finally decide to actually do something with the things that they've written?
well, I wasn't thinking of that way, although that's certainly valid, but I was thinking just that opening start is so important. And I
Oh,
um,
you mean just you're gonna write many, many drafts before you get to what
no,
you land on?
yeah, and that's part and parcel of it. But here's my opening line of my first book, and I wrestled with this. John watched his smiling Lucinda carry the pail of water into the cabin and thought how lucky he was to have fallen for her.
Mm.
You see, and
And that probably wasn't the first sentence you wrote
no,
when you started to
no,
write the book.
it was not, but I
Yeah.
liked it because the second part of the sentence has a door open, doesn't it? And
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
thought
lot being said.
lucky. Yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
lot being said, and it's not a huge sense. So, yeah, I think those things you have to work at those kind of things, and you'll know when that wonderful phrase comes up. There's another one in this book that I love to read. Oh, I don't know if I can pull it up right now. Ah, here it is. Yeah, so this is a scene. It's on page 69. And so it's in a ways. And this guy came to the home and threatened Lucy, and so she's in bed at night, and she's got rid of him and everything. And then I did this thing where she has a dream. Her dreams that night were pleasant at first, but then took a sharp turn, and she saw Indians stalking the trees. The oxen pulled the cabin over, and she was suffocating, struggling to breathe, pounding with her hands on the wall, trying to get out of the cabin, screaming, John, John, help me, John. She flew up in the dark. Someone was in the room.
Ooh. Yeah, right?
Yeah, and you see, that's the thing you want to do. And when I'm out doing a talk or something, and I'll read that kind of a paragraph, and then I'll stop, and then I sell books.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to find out who is in the room? Tell me now. No, no. Oh my gosh. Well, it's yeah. So it takes a while to get to that point, doesn't it? So for new writers out there, keep keep drafting, keep writing. What
Yeah,
do you want to say to them when they're
yeah,
starting? Yeah.
yeah. And if you get bored reading yours the fifth or sixth time, then you know there's something wrong.
Yeah. And we talked about beta readers, so we won't go there, but you use beta readers too to get
Yeah.
their opinions and so on. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Do
want,
you think, oh, go ahead.
I want people that love to read,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Did
know.
you take many tries at My Story, My Song, or did it kind of flow out? I mean, we talked about drafting, but did it flow out a little bit more effortlessly than your fiction writing, or was it just as much work in a way?
It was just as much work because you got to decide what not to tell. And with my story, my song, I started it when I was a little child and told the story. See, here's another first line. I seem to be talking about first lines today.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole other conversation.
I had new jammies.
Yeah.
What do you get from that?
Yeah, well, you're definitely a little girl, right? Who wears
Yeah.
jammies or talks about
Yeah,
those
and
jammies. Yeah.
and that's what you want to do. You want to have your words be you want to be economical with the number of words that you had. So you want to choose good words that like immediately. I had no jammies. Mom finished them just in time for Christmas Eve. Like you got the whole thing going there.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the kind of thing I think I would say to people who are trying to do this for the first time. Make your words touch you in some way. I know I've written scenes where one of my characters was a little boy and he died, and I was writing that scene, and the tears were rolling down my face,
Yeah.
and I knew that it was good because it was making me cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Make your
And
readers feel, right?
yeah,
When you make yourself feel, you got
yeah,
something, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I seem to be giving all sorts of tricks here today that I use. And I mean, people will have their own tricks as well, but you know yourself, and you can either have someone read for you and tell you what they think, or you can read it yourself. And if it does that to you, then you have an idea that it's good.
Yeah. And you can most of us can see pictures in our minds. Actually, I just met someone this week who told me that she can't do that, which is the first I've ever heard that. It's maybe it's quite rare, but most of us, I think, can see things in our minds. So when we say something like, or write something like, I, I had new jammies. Most of us would probably immediately have a picture in our mind of a little kid with like a sleeper kind of whatever, one piece or, whatever jammies look like to you. Like, yeah, like you're evoking pictures and visualizations in people's minds when you use words like that, right?
Yeah, and that takes us to word choice. Now, just we said I had new jammies. Change that to I had new pajamas.
Yeah. Doesn't tell us as much.
No, what's
Yeah.
lost? You know, you've lost that idea of the little kid.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a woman wearing a negligee or something, or whatever, a man's
Yeah,
shirt and bottom. Like it doesn't kind of tell us as much. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So word choice is really important, and that's what. Oh, what's her name in Toronto? The wonderful Canadian writer that's so. Oh, I can't think of her name right now. Margaret Atwood.
Hmm.
And one of the writing courses that I took years ago was about writing poetry in this particular lesson, and the professor read some of Atwood's poetry and pointed out to us how good she was at word choice.
Mm,
And that's
interesting.
yeah, and so that's another thing I think that if you want to be a writer, and lots of us do, then get out there and find as many places where you can learn new things. Go to conferences, go to writing groups, quit them if they're lousy. There's lots of things, there's lots of bad things. You just have to learn to be your own judge on that kind of stuff. And if you feel like you're getting something, then keep going.
Yeah. Well, and poetry might be a good thing to just help people remember there's this is going to come out wrong, but there's lots of great stuff in there, as you've said. Like some of us might think, oh, poetry, I don't really get it. I don't know what I can learn from that. But if you give it a chance, then
Yeah,
the word things like word choice or painting pictures with the words or can be
exactly.
really good for that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So open your mind to different kinds of writing too.
Yeah, yeah, it makes me think of Jane Urquhart, who wrote that book,
Yeah. The
The
underpainter.
Underpainter,
Yeah.
and that's a really good book for people to read because for those who don't know, the Underpainter is somebody who oh I got something here. No, I don't really, or you can see, but um, when a painter starts, they put the underpainting on first, and you know what's going to become over top. And so you want to, maybe you want to put, this can be really oversimplified, but you want to put some kind of a nice green or something where it's going to be, grass or
Hmm.
trees or whatever. And so the underpainter is so important because he or she makes the end product look so good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the same with words, word choice, you know. It makes the whole idea of the book and that paragraph or whatever, it makes it just sing.
Yeah, it gives it color, I guess, to kind of
Ah,
further the
there.
comparison. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about Maggie because that was a different type of book. How did you come to writing Maggie and how did you discover that story?
Well, that was funny because you and I were talking about your grandmother, and you and she both had November birthdays, and I'll just say that for so people can get what we're talking about here. And the year that my mother died, she was going to be 75 that fall, and you were going to be 25.
Yeah,
And the two of you had the idea that you would have a birthday party together and you would celebrate, and it was such a wonderful idea. And then
yeah.
my mother died that summer, and she never made to her birthday. So when she would have been 100,
Mhm.
you called me and you said to me, um, I think we should have a birthday party for grandma and me because
Yeah.
you would have been 50 and she would have been 100. And we got talking on the phone, and all of a sudden I said, oh my gosh, I've got a file folder of writing that grandma did, and maybe I could put it together. It's not finished. I don't even remember exactly what it is. And this was what, 25 years after my mother had died. And
Yeah,
I knew exactly where that was. I'd never lost it. And I pulled it out and I started reading it. And I realized that it was not fiction. I thought she was such a reader and she didn't know what to do with herself at that point in her life. And I said to her, why don't you write a book or whatever. And this is long before I ever did that. And so she did, and I was supposed to be helping her because she couldn't see well at that point, and she was a touch typist, and I was going to help her correct things and so on. Anyways, I got that out and I started to read it, and I realized that Maggie, that she had titled it, was her mother because my grandmother's name was Margaret, and of course I always called her Grandma, so
yeah.
I never really put the whole thing together. And I did. And I realized that Mom had not finished this book, but she had written the story of her mother and her mother's family. And they were Pennsylvania Dutch people that lived in the Kitchener Stratford area. And um, it was such a treasure.
Mm.
That takes us back to what we were saying earlier about leaving things for your family.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty unusual and kind of, well, did you know that you had that? Like, when did you get that piece of writing?
Oh, when she was still alive, and I was going to
You're gonna help her.
correct it for her because, as I say, she couldn't see, very well. And so I said, don't worry about that. And she was typing. She was a touch typist. She had learned that in school. And so I got it out and I looked at it. I always knew I had it. In fact,
Mm,
after she had died, I made sure that, my brother kept a lot of that stuff, and I made sure I knew where that stuff was. And then when Keith died, then I got it, and I knew I had,
mm,
and I just was blown away. So I got it out, and it's a tiny little book that I ended up with. It's I don't know, uh, a bunch of pictures at the end that I put in. Yeah, it's 87
yeah.
pages long. But what she wrote was growing up in that Pennsylvania Dutch family and what it was like through the First World War. That would be the time period. And they had Pennsylvania Dutch was kind of a euphemism for German. Now we're talking First World War, and we're talking antipathy towards the Germans, and that
Mm,
lasted all the time I was growing up, and so on too, and so on. So she wrote the story, and she was the youngest of four children, and her father started cheating on her mother.
mhm,
And, you know, my mother that would have been 1931. And women weren't free to tell their
mhm,
husband to get lost with that kind of stuff. I mean, you just sucked it up, and a lot of her friends told her to suck it up and not worry about it. And my grandmother was a strong, strong woman, I come to find out. And no, she wasn't having that.
mm,
And she made a life. Mom didn't really write so much about that there. She had sections that she hadn't finished yet. So um, it was a treasure for me to see Mom's depiction of what her mother had written about that whole period and so on. And you have to
mhm,
know that my grandmother was a wonderful grandmother. She was
mm,
funny, she was smart, she was just delightful, and she loved all of her grandchildren so much, and she made the best cookies. And I mean, she was the epitome of a wonderful person, a wonderful grandmother. So I had to figure out what to do with that, and I put it together. And then that fall, when Mom would have been 100, we launched this book. And
mhm.
I did it for the family, but then I decided that the people in the world needed to hear that story too.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask you to say both of their names because I think sometimes with women's history too, we can forget to actually name them. So tell us, who Alice and who Maggie were. Like, tell us their full names, and then I've got another
Okay.
question for you too.
Well, my mother was Lillian, Virginia, Alice, Doxy, and then she married my father, so Garner. So she had a handle.
Yeah.
But they always called her Alice. And my grandmother was Margaret. uh, Gable was her maiden name. And then her husband's name was Doxy. And so that's where my mother got that from.
Hmm.
So yeah, and if you go, this is for the people who live nearby. If you are in Stratford and you take Highway 7 east towards Kitchener, you will go by the old Lingelbach Church and the Lingelbach Cemetery, where all of my mother's family are buried there. And
Mm.
it's all beautifully maintained and so on. I suppose direct descendants of the ones that live there look after it, but it's beautiful. And it's just something that is a treasure that I found this book, and I was able to figure out a way to put it out. Um, I don't know. It speaks to my heart.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Show us the cover again because I just want people to see who the authors are and how you did that. Yeah. So Alice Garner, Elaine Cougler, so her and you put them both on. You really wanted to credit her as being like the author.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then what I did was in a couple of places, I put a little chapter there that showed that I think only about three places that there was parts left out of the story and I couldn't, nobody was alive that would know. And so I put down what I knew in those types of little chapters and so on. So there's always a way to save what you've got, even though you wish you had the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. You wish you could have just found it and published it and then, wrap it up in a nice little box, but it wasn't so easy, this
No,
partially finished thing. Yeah.
no.
What was
So,
their reaction to, from your siblings and people that were close to your mom and you when you published that? Were people pleased? Were they surprised? What was the reaction?
well, a lot of my siblings were gone by then. Um, for instance, your Aunt Linda would have been absolutely beside herself with joy.
Hmm.
I know, and a couple of my brothers were very happy, and some of them were the silence was very loud. But that's people. You have to learn to write your stories from a place that comes from you, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Not everyone is effusive about your writing and what you're doing, right? Like they're just
yeah,
not really into it in a way. Yeah.
isn't that interesting you say that because I feel that that's a very big failing we have in our society. That people are terrible about asking somebody else. Like your father and I, we're both high school teachers and we like to talk to people and we like to learn their stories and we're interested. We're genuinely interested. But we'll often come away from a party or something and we'll say, "Well, did anybody ask you about you?"
Like,
And they don't. People are so bad at not going
yeah.
back with questions or conversational bits or so on. I think we
Yeah.
we need to start teaching conversation in school, I think.
Hey, I'm trying to work on it in my facilitation work, but I think it's probably good for writers, especially new writers, to know that even though you're really excited about what you're writing and what you're doing, not everyone really is, and they won't ask you about it, and they seem like they don't care. So you got to find your tribe, right? To kind of have those folks that are
Yeah.
curious, and it's hard to be a writer sometimes, isn't it? When people don't care as much as you do about what you're writing.
Well, and I'm not sure it's that they don't care. I think that it's that they're not aware of how important it is. And I think our
Yeah.
society has done this too, because in over the 50 years that, we were teaching and, getting older as we are, growing into white-haired people, the interest in science and math has ballooned. It's just so big. And I mean, there's all kinds of technological advancements that are made. But lots of times in the school system, it's at the expense of the arts.
Mm,
Music classes are shut down in the schools, and gosh, when I was in school, they had an art class. In grade 9, you could take art and you could learn all these things. And I don't really hear my grandchildren talking about this. She took woodworking. I love that. I thought,
yeah.
yeah, because it allows you to be creative. And when I was years ago, I was taking some of my accreditation for teaching. One of the things I learned was that preschool kids need to be read to and then to read with you and so on and see the
Mm,
pictures and see the words and they need all of that. And that is the prime thing for analytical thinking. And what
mm,
do we need analytical thinking for? We need it for math. We need it for making decisions, all those.
mhm.
So we have this idea that, um, they're artsy things and they don't matter. They're just fluff.
Yeah, yeah. Some people maybe, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's I think it's just a foreign land for some people, right? It's like if I were
Yeah.
to meet somebody that was a rocket scientist at a party and you're kind of, thinking to yourself, well, how do I even talk about this?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
how's that? Like you'd have the most
Yeah.
innocuous sort of question, I guess. You wouldn't quite know how to get into that. And maybe some people feel
Yeah.
that way about writing because it's just so foreign to them to be a
Well,
writer, to write.
and
Yeah.
that comes back to us having different brains.
Yeah,
And
for
and
sure.
so
Yeah.
really your statement proves my point. We have
Yeah,
different brains.
definitely.
We have to help everybody to improve their abilities with whatever brain they've got.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I'm in the business of learning. I'm thinking about brains and how to
Yeah.
reach them quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's an amazing topic, isn't it? But
Any
let's see.
any final words you want to say about writing memoir, writing these two books that you want to leave everybody with?
Um, I wrote some notes down here and now I don't know what they mean.
Okay, well, let's not go there.
But I think that one thing I wanted to say, there are a lot of things in all of my books that I put in there just for me. And you
Mm,
as writers can do that. You can um my dad had, these people that have what they call the widow's peak, and it comes down
yeah.
like this at the forehead. And my dad had a widow's peak. And my dad was a good looking man. And I gave the main male character in my first book a widow's peak. So
Mm,
it's kind of fun to do that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter at all. But look at the people around you and think about, well, what's different about that? And can I use that in my story?
yeah. What about the chin cleft? Did you ever put that in?
I
Because I know
did.
Uncle Wayne had
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And people do. And so I think one thing that bothers me about reading some people's writing now, since I'm older and it's harder for me to remember, and I'm going to admit that because it's going to happen to most everybody. But if you give your characteristics like that are different, you will help your reader because they will be able to remember, oh yeah, that's the guy with the cleft chin.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
differentiates, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about, not in this series, but just you and I talking about, characters where all of the family tree, they're all red-haired people and they all have very similar names. And like that kind of stuff is really difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, who is this guy
And
again?
then the funny thing about that is that we have relatives that named all their kids with the same letter starting. Well,
Yeah.
don't do that in your books. You drive us all crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's difficult. Yeah, again, language choice and then the naming of characters or giving characters characteristics. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting to think about. Yeah.
And don't make all the names 5 letters. You
Yeah.
know, make one Bartholomew and one Art. You know what I mean? Just make them different, and it
Yeah.
helps people. And you see, the reason for that is that you want your reader to not lose focus from your story. You don't want your reader to be thinking about, oh, who was that? Yeah, well, I got to go back and you don't want their brain to be doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Takes them out of the story. Yeah. So keep them in as much as possible.
I think maybe you just kind of went still. There you
Yeah.
are.
Here we are back again. Yeah, we've had a little couple of blips today. So sorry to everybody for that. The internet, poltergeist is alive and well in our time together today. But yeah, I think that does that feel good for talking about memoir?
Yeah, yeah. I think, oh, one final thing. Please write your memoirs. Please, your family will love you, especially 2 or 3 generations down the road.
Thanks.